It was JUNK in my personal opinion. And I really went off on my show talking about 15 minutes about how horrible this Mac Mini was, the experience I had with it. And I couldn't believe how Apple users were so enthralled with Apple products. And I was a PC guy, I was Windows hardcore. And I said, if I just had 15 minutes to talk to Steve Jobs, I said, I would tell him what I really thought about this Mac Mini. And he said in passing, jokingly, about 2 weeks later, my phone rang. I was at my house. Luckily enough, I was at the office, and the secretary came on. She said, Todd, I've got Steve on the line for you. I said, Steve who? She got Steve Jobs on the phone for you. She clicked me over in an instant. Todd, Steve Jobs. Tell me about your Mac Mini. And, you do this, you're like.
The Tom Screen podcast is owned and made possible by Ethical Marketing Service. If your business is struggling with Google or Facebook ads, maybe you're frustrated figuring it out, or there's a performance issue, Ethical Marketing Service has worked on hundreds of accounts and we can help in this area. We offer a 30-day money-back guarantee, and for every direct account we look after, we sponsor a child in a developing nation with food, water and education. If you would like to find out if we can help, it's a free, no salesy consultation call, and the link is in the description. Enjoy the episode. Thomas Green here with Ethical Marketing Service. On the episode today, we have Todd Cochrane. Todd, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show.
It is my pleasure. Would you like to take a moment and tell the audience a bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Todd Cochrane. I'm a podcast content creator, first and foremost. Been creating podcasts for 18 years. Seems like an awfully long time. But I'm also run a podcast service company called Blueberry Podcasting. It's a full service podcasting host. Provide everything a podcaster needs to get started, to get online, to get their show going, provide growth tools. Really kind of a all-encompassing packages for both individuals and businesses. But yeah, that's kind of the essence, the 411 of me and what I do.
Thank you for the introduction. 18 years is quite impressive in this particular space. Do you remember why you first started?
It really goes back to a set of circumstances. I was serving at the time in the U.S. Navy. I had suffered a pretty bad back injury earlier in 2004, which basically grounded me. I couldn't fly anymore. So I was flying a desk and basically looking to be productive. I was in a body cast and was spending time out in Waco, Texas. And in Texas in October, it's very, very hot. And I spent a lot of time in my hotel room just trying to stay cool because of the body cast. And spent a lot of time on the internet. Now, I'd run a variety of online sites, done a whole bunch of things in the early days before even the internet was online, with something called a bulletin board. I was a blogger. And more importantly, I was a pretty much a failed blogger at the time. And when I heard about this new medium called podcasting, I thought this is something that is right up my alley. I like to talk and tell stories. So here in the U.S., ran across the store to a Walmart and picked up a very inexpensive microphone, plugged it in, and recorded my first episode. And you can imagine those first few episodes sounded pretty bad. But, really what it was in the beginning, I really wanted one thing. I had one goal, and I did have a goal from the very beginning of doing the show. I wanted to build authority in the tech space. I had a tech site called Geek News Central. So I like to talk about a lot of tech things. So I was really trying to build authority in the tech space. And that was the initial goal. And that was really the genesis moment of getting it started. Of course, there's a whole story about the chaos that ensued in trying to keep the show online in the early days.
Would you say that you achieved your goal? And if so, when did that happen?
I understand that I wanted to build authority, but I didn't really know what that meant. At the time, I was following all the there were still lots of print magazines, a lot of people that were in print writing about different types of gear. And really the idea was that I would be able to attend an event that is at the time was called the Consumer Electronics Show. Today it's called CES, just straight up. They don't use the acronym anymore. And the goal was to get a press pass and be able to go and cover the event and just kind of nerd out. And ultimately in 2005, I was able to achieve that. But really, before I achieved getting the credentials and then starting to build authority for the website, was I really kind of found a new niche. I found that podcasting was kind of the place where I really excelled at in helping content creators get started. Was one of the first to bring in monetization in the podcasting space. But I think ultimately it was my spouse who said, this is costing us a lot of money because there was no flat rate hosting at the time. It was basically you kind of had to figure your own way. And I was spending a lot of money. So she kind of put a finger on my chest and said, listen, you got 2 years to figure out how to make money with this thing. And that led to ultimately a path of really finding a sponsor for the show and then building a business. So it was kind of a series of things that happened. The tech show that I do today is still online. I still do 2 episodes a week generally, 1,600 plus episodes. I still have the same sponsor that I got in 2005. So I guess I did achieve the goal of building authority, but at the same time, the secondary goal of monetizing the show led to a whole bunch of other things.
So you just to for clarity, you got that goal that you wanted in within a year, is that right?
Yeah, probably within about 14 months. And that was, I was a small fish in a big pond going to that event because at the time it was very rare. The CNETs and the ZDNet and those big tech names of the time, they were the ones that were usually afforded the press passes. So to get a press pass to go to CES and being really kind of almost a nobody and going to that show was quite an achievement. And I was able to go there with a friend of mine, and we covered the show and had a great time and learned new strategies. And we go to this day, which led to relationships with companies, relationship with the CEA that runs CES. Today we do live broadcast tower, so we're an integral part of that show every year. But it really was we had to pay our dues in the beginning and prove to the organization that the content they were creating there was valuable for the vendors that were exhibiting.
Well, as I'm sure you're very well aware, there is during in podcasting there is a fair amount of people who perhaps give up or struggle with creating that content. Have you ever perhaps had that feeling where you were taking it seriously? And if so, how frequent was that?
Well, I really dug into this pretty heavy from the get go. I figured I was onto something largely because of the audience that migrated to the show immediately, where I had not found success with blogging. I found success with creating content. I was have fun doing it. That was important because in matter of fact, even to this day, I've told my audience when it's no longer fun, I'm going to quit. But it's still fun and I still enjoying the content. And honestly, I create the content more for me than the audience, even though the audience is the recipient of this content that I create, because it's often me learning about new things and being able to stay abreast of what's going on and then share my thoughts. So, the creating content in the podcasting space is the number one reason content creators quit because it's hard. It's hard work. And I feel oftentimes the reason that shows fail in this space is because number one, they didn't establish the goal they were going to have of that show. And number two, they were not passionate about the topic that they cover. I think you have to have a burning passion for the content that you are covering and have a goal on what the show that you're creating is going to achieve, whether it be lead generation, whether it be again, like me, wanting to build authority. Maybe monetization is the idea. Maybe it's self help, or some folks use podcasting as a way of therapy. And I think a lot of podcasters do their podcast, number one, to talk to other people and learn new ideas and add that to their repertoire of knowledge. Again, it really depends on the goal. And again, my goal, for at least in that initial show, was authority, then monetization. Um, but I think from a content creation standpoint, I was lucky in that I picked I was in a content category that I love, but also at the same point, I do a lot of news coverage. So it's this never ending supply of content. There's always something to talk about. It's not like I'm going to run out of things to say.
Well, one of my questions, I feel like you may have answered it already, but one of my questions I wanted to ask you is, why do you podcast now? And because you've got your tech podcast, is it just because it's fun for you, or is there additional reasons there?
Well, number one, I still have a sponsor. So that helps monetarily. I get paid every month based upon the performance of that campaign. Um, so that helps. That's a bit of a motivating factor, and I think that's in the back of many content creators' minds today. Also, I enjoy doing the show. I love the interaction with the audience. I do my show live as well as a regular standard podcast distribution. So for me, that little bit of interactivity is fun. The ability to create the content and share what I think is as important. I do a couple of other shows as well, primarily related to podcasting, but I truly believe it's about giving back. I've been in this space a long time, have a lot of knowledge to share. So I'm kind of in a unique position in that the show itself is, the two shows I do from podcasting I do during work hours. So I'm actually getting paid to do that. But the show that I do, the tech show, is on my own. But ultimately, um, really the it just has to be something you're passionate about and want to do, because there is a lot of work that goes into creating content.
And I'm interested to know, you mentioned plenty of benefits to podcasting, but I'm interested to know how it's affected you personally, in the sense that what skills have you developed that you didn't expect to develop over that time frame?
I'm definitely very comfortable in getting in front of a very large audience now, um, because
Does
I've
that
also taken it.
translate to in-person speaking as well, or not?
It does, yeah. And the reason was is I've always tried to visualize how big my audience is and visualize who is listening from a if it's a, and I tell content creators this all the time, if your show's getting 100 listeners or 1,000 or 10,000, just go to Google and ask for an image that shows 10,000 people, and when you see that, you have an idea that the value of the audience that's listening to is much bigger than it. 10,000 is a number, but when you see a visualization of 10,000, and if you're going to go and stand in front of 10,000 people to speak, you become better prepared. So I've always told content creators, always visualize how big your audience is, because I think you'll take it more seriously in the content that you're creating, no matter what size your show is. It's easy just to pull up the mic and start talking, but if you knew that 10,000 people are going to listen to what you had to say or you were presenting, you probably would come at it from a different angle. So from my standpoint, now being able to get up in front of a big audience and share about the space is really exciting to me, and it's probably a big piece of what is one of the outcomes of this. Not only that, it's the friendships, lifelong friendships of people that I've never known that listen to the show. I go into a city, have a meetup, maybe 20 people show up. It's people that I really don't know, but they don't know me, and we become instant friends. So for me, it's not only the sharing of the message, but it's also the audience, the interaction with the audience, and the new lifetime friends I've achieved. I think there's probably a whole list of things, and from it depends on what your show's about. If you're a business show, maybe it ends up being that person that walks in that's going to be a new mentor, or maybe it's the biggest deal you've ever been able to sign, or it really, the reasons and the value of doing content like this is pretty wide.
Have you had any negative experiences with people that have known your content but not known you?
Yeah, I've every show has its naysayers. There was a gentleman by the name of Sal out in New Jersey, and he loved just putting me on blast via email. But I embraced people that had were critical of my work. And number one, I always said, okay, if Sal or someone else is being critical of something I've said, probably another percentage of the audience is thinking the same thing. So I always took that feedback seriously. And I think anytime that you put yourself out there publicly, you're going to open yourself up for a little bit of criticism. Um, I was just in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and I was doing some consulting I went to an event where there was about podcasting, and they had some consultation time, and I was talking to a young lady who was getting ready to do a show that is about personal trauma. And I told her, I said, you're going to be putting your life out there. You're going to be talking about things that have happened to you. You may want to do this under a stage name. I said, the internet can be very cruel. And I said, I don't know how this region is going to react to this type of content. So maybe a stage name would be good in the beginning, and keep your city anonymous and your family anonymous, but share what you can within those constraints. So doing content, and depending on the type of content you have, obviously opens you up to more criticism and more feedback. But I've been pretty lucky. I've had limited number of negative consequences from doing the shows.
Thank you for that. I tend to take notice if it's actually someone trying to help you along, constructive feedback. If someone calling you a name, I don't tend to take any notice of that.
Right. And when they do, sometimes it's kind of fun because you share that with the audience, and the audience, does a pile on feedback. So, it's kind of, it you just have to you have to decide what you want to share and what you don't want to share.
You mentioned the sponsor, and that's, as you said, something that people struggle with. What advice would you give someone now in terms of that topic?
I think you really have to think about, again, what is the goal? Is the goal truly money? If the goal is truly money, then you have to be focused on putting out consistent, sustained, superior content. You have to be doing what I call the grind. The grind is all those things to build a show, just like you would build a business: social promotion, potentially some advertising, getting your name out there, appearing on other shows, just anything you can do. And there's a whole litany. There's probably 25 things you can do as a content creator to help build your show. Um, but I know that it's a struggle. And one of the things that we implemented recently, something called programmatic advertising. And it's really and I didn't come up with this term. It came up by someone else, Tom Webster. It's a term called bridge money. Bridge money being the earn enough money in the early days of your show as you're building it to at least have something to say, I earned some money for this show. It may only be take your partner out to dinner money, but it could be car payment money. Then you want to do is you want to build that by continuing to build your show, build your audience, build that into life-changing money. I think that most content creators that are new in the podcasting space do not understand how hard it is to build an audience. If you're not a celebrity, and if you don't already have a pre-established big audience and you're starting new, or maybe you're known well in your community, but you're not known beyond maybe, let's say, 100 kilometers, 100 miles of your home, then you have to really work hard to build your authority, build your brand. So I always tell content creators when they're starting, especially if they're brand new, this is a marathon. It's not a race. But if you expect just to put out content and that's all you do, I always tell them it's not going to be enough. It's not going to be enough unless you're discovered and you have a unique talent to really bring a lot of listeners. And some people do have that talent. They have a natural talent to attract people to their audiences. They build huge shows and don't have to work too hard. But for the majority of content creators, It's just like YouTube. You think about YouTube creators and how many that make it into 10, 50, 100,000 people um, that are actually have made it to the monetization stage. Maybe they've already worked 5 years putting out content to get to that stage and put out 100 videos or 200, whatever it has taken to build. And it's the same with podcasting. You have to build an audience if you're going to monetize. I've been very, very fortunate. I built an audience that was a very loyal following of listeners, and I was able to get the sponsorship with GoDaddy. And I have to meet my numbers every month. It's not a free ride. I have to meet my base, and if I get above that base, I get a bonus. If I go under that for a couple of months, they let me know. We work hard to get that number back up, but it's truly a performance based sponsorship. And one thing that happens when you're in this space and you're doing a show long enough, what you'll find doesn't matter who you are. At some point, you kind of get sick and tired of listening to some people. It just kind of happens. You've had enough. You've had your fill, and you want to go listen to someone else for a while. So, what I've seen, at least with my show, is that people listen for a couple of years, and then they wander off and go listen to some other shows for a couple of years, and then they come back. They say, "Oh, you're still here," and they're back listening. But because people are constantly leaving over time, you have to continue to fill the well with more listeners coming in, because after all, if that audience didn't change at 1,600 episodes, they're not going to be buying GoDaddy anymore because they've heard it 1,600 times. So you really have to kind of continue to fill the well with new listeners. And what I did, my strategy was I used my website and a lot of Google search traffic to drive conversions to the podcast. And I fed the Google beast new articles every week. And I still do, to continue to drive continued traffic to the website, that a percentage of those folks, a small percentage, will say, wow, there's a podcast associated with this website. Let me check it out. And so for me, my acquisition strategy for new listeners has largely been the ability to get them to the website to say, hey, there's a podcast here. It's not the only way. There's no rules in podcasting, but it's my way. It's the way I've done things. And I build a brand that is, I feel, has value, has good Google value. I protect that dearly.
So I was about to ask, because you mentioned the fact that just putting out content isn't enough. I was about to ask what you would advise people to do who are starting now, but is that pretty much the, being smart with the marketing?
I think that you really have to focus on, number one, being original, being yourself. You can't be someone else. People will smell someone that's faking it very, very quickly. So this is why it's important to be passionate about your content and bring on, if you're going to have guests, bring on great guests. And maybe in the early days, you won't get that headliner guest, but use those initial 20, 30, 40 interviews to kind of cut your teeth and build interviewing skills. If you can pull out one gem from every person that you talk to and use that as a piece of value to your audience, that's the key, providing value and not wasting the listener's time. If you provide some value, one or two real hardcore pieces of value, people will come back. If you don't give them value, they won't listen. They're there for a reason. You're there to feed them because they are interested in you, number one. Number two, they're interested in the type of content you're creating. I really truly think that's a big part of success. When Rob Greenlee and Rob works as a competitor, he works at Libsyn, he's worked at multiple companies. So we're both literally competing with each other in companies, but we do a show together. And his and I's goal on that show is just to bring value, bring information, give tidbits, give a walk away. And if you're able to do that, then people will build your show into their lives and they will tune in every week that you create a podcast. They'll be there loyally and listening. and they will spread the word about your show. And that's the number one way content creators are found, is by a listener saying, "Oh my goodness, did you hear that? I heard an interview today on a show. You need to go listen to show XYZ." But at the same time, you as the content creator are going to have to do those other things. I've often said that when I was doing my book, writing my book on podcasting, I wish I was an interview show, because I could have got lots of more ideas for the book by doing an interview show. And I think that folks that do interview shows, a book almost writes itself by the interviews that you do and the takeaways you get from that. So I think every podcaster, there's a book in them, but it also truly boils down to the simple things. I remember putting myself out there, and I hit like 50 episodes or something like that. I was living in Hawaii, and I reached out to the local news organization and said, "Hey, I'm 50 episodes in. I'm celebrating 50 episodes." Well, they came out, brought a truck, put cameras in my house, my little studio. It was kind of dumb, but they did a 20, 30-minute interview, but I ended up being like 2 minutes on television. And then those types of things end up adding more value. And ultimately, because I had went to a number of events and put myself in places and was said, "Hey, can I come in and be interviewed?" I ultimately I was on the BBC call list for BBC Asia. They would call me at 3 o'clock in the morning and said, they say, "Mr. Cochrane, we'd love to have you on in 15 minutes to talk about this. Can you talk about that?" And I always said yes, because I knew if I didn't know the topic completely, within 10 minutes of being on Google, I could give them the 3-minute soundbite they wanted and then go back to bed. So for years, that phone would ring and I would jump up and I knew it would be the BBC. And every time I was on the BBC, I was able to say, "My name's Todd Cochrane. I've got a podcast over at geeknewscentral.com." So what value that was, it was maybe just a little, but it was one of many, 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 many things that I did to continue to grow the show and keep it relevant.
Thank you for that. It's a great story. You mentioned about the time frame that's required to grow an audience. If in this hypothetical, if there was someone who was looking to get a sponsor and they were starting now, and let's say that they're good, they're not excellent, but they're good at podcasting. How long would you say, as an average, it would take to grow an audience to that size?
So, this is an interesting question, because
How
there's
long's
several
a piece of
answers.
string?
Yeah. Well, if you're a neurosurgeon and you're doing a podcast on neurosurgery and you have 1,000 neurosurgeons listening to your show, you can get a sponsor pretty quickly, because I saw that happen. I saw an individual get $20,000 per episode because he had 1,000 neurosurgeons listening to his show. Whereas my show, when I first got the sponsor, we didn't really know the numbers then. I kind of thought it would be like 40,000 listeners, but it probably wasn't. It was 10,000, probably was the more accurate number at the time when I got my sponsor. The sponsor relationship came to me because they heard about the show. Oftentimes, you'll find a sponsor from the listener in your audience. So maybe in the marketing or whatever field you're in doing your show, you'll have someone that says, "Oh my goodness, I love the content here. I want to be an underwriter, or I want to be a sponsor." So sometimes the deals come from within the audience. I found my business partners from my business within my podcast. So those are folks that are already loyal. They love the content. They like to listen, and they want to be associated with you. So again, it is a variable question, but to build volume, to truly build high dollar amounts, you do have to build a big audience or have a super niche audience that's super valuable, or somewhere in between. And then again, I always tell content creators, when someone does come to you and wants to advertise on your show, please understand that they have a goal and you need to know what their goal is. Is their goal awareness of their product? Is their goal X number of leads? You need to know what that is up front, so that if they say, "Well, I would be happy if your show delivered me 3 leads a month," that's the goal, then you know really kind of how to better price that. Because if you get done with the first month, they said, well, we got 10 leads. Well, obviously you're undercharging. You need to charge a little more for that because you over delivered. But then again, if the goal was 3 and they got 1, well, maybe you need to lower the price a little bit of the advertising that's going on the show to make sure they're getting their value. My goal is to make them sign for a whole year. I want them to be there month after month after month. I want them to be happy. Um, a lot of these deals that come to content creators now are kind of here today, gone tomorrow. They come in and advertise for 2 or 3 episodes on your show. You make a little money, but then you don't hear from them for 6 months. I don't like those kinds of deals because it builds uncertainty into your business. I like to be able to get someone in and run for 2 or 3 months at a minimum in every episode so that you can tell the story about their business, so that you can share what you like about it. And that's another thing that's important. If you agree to take someone as an advertiser, you better really, truly love that product because you're the talent, you're the general manager, you're the salesperson, and you're the person that has to put the content out in front of the people and maintain your reputation. There's been some deals that have come to me that just kind of got this taste in the back of my mouth that was like, it didn't really taste real well. You had that feeling that this isn't the fit. Like maybe the hair stands up on the back of your neck. And I walked away from deals like that because it was yucky. And I knew the audience would say, that why are you presenting this to me? So I think it's important to be able to stand behind a product and put your name behind it. The situation with GoDaddy was they were making a lot of mistakes in the early days of that sponsorship. Their founder at the time had done some insanely crazy things that today would have just destroyed the company. And I would go to them and say, "Hey, you have to stop this. This is not good for business." And I had to be critical of the sponsor on my show and let my audience know that, hey, I've spoken to them. I don't agree with what they're doing. They have agreed there's going to be change. And that was actually the best thing ever that I ever learned about running advertising and podcasting is the company you're representing may not always do the things you want them to do. And you have to be willing to say, okay, and if it gets to the point of where it's too reprehensible, you have to pull the plug. But the relationship I had with them was good. And I always tell my audience, if you have a problem with the product, I want to know first because I've got the connection at the company to make sure you get it right, you get fixed. And every once in a while, something would come through, someone had had a bad experience, and I would say, go right to the vice president. And I would say, here's the problem my listeners having and what your customer support people did. You need to fix this. And then I was able to come back later and say, yep, they fixed it, or they know they did it because of this. And that built brand loyalty for my audience and me too. So again, I think it's if you can have a good relationship with a sponsor, that goes a long, long ways. But sometimes in this space, the way it is today, it's not possible because there's too many intermediaries in between you and the actual vendor. So all you can do is really ask for the best terms and make sure you like the product and can actually say you like something without, kind of gritting your teeth at the same time.
Well, I think having a good relationship with the sponsor, you're pretty exemplary at that, given your experience and how long you've had them for. I'm interested to know about how you've improved over time, because I started off, and you reference when you start off, it's not the best, not your best work necessarily or the best quality, but I've tried to get better over time. And currently thinking about some sort of background because the office isn't the most kind of glamorous thing. You got some cool tech stuff going on for all the audio people. But my question is, can you sort of summarize the steps that you've gone through in terms of your improvement over your long podcasting history?
So from the very beginning, I had young children at home at the time, 3 young children. And I knew every Monday and Thursday night I was going to be doing a show where I would start recording at 8 p.m., which was after a long work day, a couple of hours of prep. And I made an agreement with my spouse that she would handle the kids those 2 or 3 hours each of those show days. It was a big commitment on her part. And the goal for me really was to be prepared, to be as prepared as I possibly could be, because I chose not to edit my shows. If I would have had to edit my podcast, I would not be a content creator today. That goes against the norm. Everyone wants to have a show that's edited now. But I think that if you can get your pacing down and be prepared, a few ums and ahs are not going to kill anyone. And I think that as long as you're prepared to come on and do the content and keep your audience engaged, and you work on that show after show after show, you'll find much success, even if you edit afterwards. But I really think it boils down to preparation. I talked to many content creators over the years when I know there was no preparation whatsoever, and it just doesn't go so well. It's not a smooth conversation. And there's the transitions are bad and it's awkward. So I think that as long as you're prepared to do your content, that's really, really important. Another thing I did is I invested early. I started off with that 1495 El Cheapo Lab Tech microphone, but within about 5 episodes, I went and spent a little bit of money, not a lot, to up the audio game. So what I really wanted to have come out of the end result was as high as quality as possible from an audio standpoint. Content listeners will, or content, your audience will forgive you for bad video if you decide to go that route, but they will not forgive you for bad audio. So having a good audio chain was always important to me from that standpoint. But I also found that even today, more than 2,000 episodes across a couple of shows, plus maybe another 1,000 interviews, I destroy the English language at every opportunity. And if you can laugh at yourself, my audience has learned to call them Toddisms. It's something the audience came up with. It's words that I could never pronounce correctly, and it's just the flavor of the show, and it makes me cringe. But it's just you keep on moving. So I think the end result is mic time. If you spend enough time on the mic, you will get better. The more interviews you do, you'll get better. The more research you do, you'll get better. I was astounded one time someone had done like 20 hours of research on me when I went on to do an interview, and they knew a lot. And they went and dug into something that I had talked about in a show a couple of years before, and I was astounded that that person honed in on that particular topic. And we dug in for 30 or 40 minutes on that because the content creator had done research and brought some value out that I had really never exposed before. So I think over time, you just get better at finding those spots to pull those gems out and make them, again, giving that value back to the audience. Some people are really natural at it. I'm really jealous that people sit down in day one and just have this good on mic presence. I was not that guy. I really wasn't. I I struggled, and it probably took a year to when I felt pretty confident in the flow and being able to sit down and put the show out in a decent quality. But again, I think it's really finding your voice and spending that time behind the mic.
Well, you referenced a story from that someone's sort of picked up on, and there's one which I know that you've probably been asked about many times before, but I can't help myself. And it's you never know who's listening. So
Yeah.
would you be willing to share this story?
Yeah, absolutely. It was in the early days of when Apple. So I always knew that there was people listening to the show that never really sent an email because something would be said in an event or something. Oh, you listen to the show and you get, the eyeball. Well, I had bought the very first Mac Mini as my first Mac product. And I'm going to be honest with you, that thing was a piece of crap. It was JUNK in my personal opinion. And I really went off on my show talking about 15 minutes about how horrible this Mac Mini was, and the experience I had with it. And I couldn't believe how Apple users were so enthralled with Apple products. And I was a PC guy, I was Windows hardcore. And I said, if I just had 15 minutes to talk to Steve Jobs, I said, I would tell him what I really thought about this Mac Mini. And he said in passing, jokingly, about 2 weeks later, my phone rang. I was at my house. Luckily enough, I was at the office, and the secretary came on. She said, Todd, I've got Steve on the line for you. I said, Steve who? She got Steve Jobs on the phone for you. She clicked me over in an instant. Todd, Steve Jobs, tell me about your Mac Mini. And go, you do this, you're like, this man that's bigger than life. And it was, we had a conversation about the Mac Mini. I was very brutally honest about him, what I liked about it, what I was having trouble with. And we had a good conversation. There was a few other things that were talked about. And when we got done, he gave me 15 minutes exactly. Click off. He went at 15 minutes. But about a week later, I got a call from the Ala Moana Apple store in Oahu and said, we have something here for you. We'd like you to come down. And I kind of had a suspicion. I grabbed my friend Ryan Ozawa and I said, you need to bring your camera. This is going to be interesting. And we went to the Apple store, and Steve had sent me a MacBook Pro and complimentary of Apple. So you never truly know who is listening. Now, our past president here in the United States, I got to talk to him one time too. When he was doing The Apprentice, there was a couple of guys that wanted to do an Apprentice podcast. And I told him the Trump organization would never, ever, ever approve copyright for them to do this podcast. And they said, well, we'll have them call you. And it was about a week later. And I talked to Donald Trump for about literally 3 minutes. I think I said 2 words during the whole conversation. Okay, great, awesome, fantastic. Looking forward to the paperwork. I think that's about all I said. And it was maybe a 3 minute. He wasn't listening, but that staff told him that conversation. But again, it goes back to you just never know who's listening to a show. So, whoever your dream guest is or the dream person you want to interview, maybe verbalize that in the show. Maybe they're listening, you just don't know, or someone that knows them will say, hey, I know this podcaster that is either a fan or whatever. They want to talk to you, or they've got an issue about your product. You might be surprised.
It's a fantastic story. I love it. And thank you for telling it. Is there someone at the moment that you would like to verbalize in terms of who you'd like to talk to?
In the world I live in now, I am one of those kind of guys that's pretty outspoken. I kind of just say things the way they are. And people that listen to specifically the podcast show that I do with the new media show, they know who they are, and I speak to them directly on a regular basis. Sometimes they're willing to talk, sometimes they're not, but I've never been one to really hide my opinion per se. But if there was someone, if let's a dream guest to talk to, oh, I was lucky enough to talk to some great entrepreneurs, GoPro in their early days. I was and one of a few journalists that was able to interview them when they were launching GoPro. Some of these folks that started with nothing, they really started, a 10 by 10 booth at a trade show and has grown them into, companies that are now well known on Wall Street or NASDAQ. And they've been, they made their fortunes. Those type of people are always interesting to go back and talk to about their journey and what happened and how they got, discovered, how their product, was taken and, people ran with it and become mainstream. So I don't think there's anyone specific right now, but I'm always, following companies that I followed for years. And unfortunately, I get to talk to a lot of them still. GoPro being one of those. I still get to talk to them quite a bit in an intimate way, almost as a, not necessarily as a friend, but as they appreciate what I did, I appreciated what they did. That's kind of one example, but I think that's maybe what you'll find in podcasting is you're going to develop a lot of great relationships that will open doors. The reason I went out to Riyadh to speak to this new opening market of content creators was you wouldn't think that Saudi Arabia would be opening up to allow podcast creators. It's a changing world there. And I met someone at a trade show and said, "Hey, we're thinking about having an event." Had a conversation. It was very interesting to me. So you just never know when a conversation is going to lead to an opportunity. When they say, I know this person there, maybe they're going to be a good fit for a business partner or an idea, or maybe I'm going to bring them on a board of directories or an advisory team. So I think really the opportunities you can have in podcasting from doing your content and being original and true, I think really opens up a lot of doors.
Well, you've been a great guest today. I've loved having the conversation, and congratulations on your, I don't know, being an expert in your field, I suppose. Is there anything I should have asked you about today?
Well, I think for if one of your listeners is thinking about doing a podcast, here's the main thing: there's no rules. There's 100 different ways to start a show, do a show. There's really no rules. You do it your way. But the only thing I really am kind of a proponent of is I believe that just like a business, if you're going to have a brick and mortar, we sometimes choose to rent the property that we're in, and we know the constraints of that rental agreement. We know that the landlord's going to come back in so many years and is going to try to raise the rent, that type of thing. But in podcasting, I truly believe content creators should own their brand. I believe they should have their own .com. I believe they should have their own website to go associated with their podcast. I don't believe you build a castle on rented property. And if you're trying to build a podcast and be a castle, be something big, it needs to be built on something that you own, something that you can call home. I call my personal site Moonbase Alpha. It's kind of a stupid, nerdy thing, but it's truly where my audience knows that the show and the content originates. I don't care where they listen. I don't care what device, what service. It really doesn't matter as long as they can find the content. But the main thing they're going to know is that if they need to find Todd, if they need to get in contact with me, and they forgot anything else about the show, my Twitter account or all the other stuff that we reach out on social, they know to come back to the website and they can find a way there to connect with me. So I guess that's my advice. Anyone, and that's probably goes true in business too, is you need to have a place that you own, you can control the message. And I think that's the most important thing is, again, building your brand on your own .com.
Yeah, there are plenty of examples of people who have built massive followings, which are there one day and gone the next. So 100% in agreement.
It's just, because you never know when the Google or YouTube algorithm or whatever it may be is going to, stuff you down and you're not found anymore. It's pretty sad, but as long as you have your own brand, you can recover from that. And as the people that you're connected with now, they won't lose you in that chaos that may happen.
Well, I told you beforehand, there's one question I always like to ask everyone, and that is, Todd, what does success mean to you?
Success means to me is at this point in my career is helping other content creators be successful in creating content and helping them grow their shows and giving them advice to do so. That really is what success looks like to me. I've built a company that is self-sustaining. It's successful. We're obviously trying to grow that, but our primary focus is helping content creators to publish, analyze, and give them objectable information to grow their show, give them the tools that they need to be able to do that. Not everyone gets an opportunity to do a one-on-one with me, but I try to talk to a lot of content creators. But again, my team's goal and my goal is to help other content creators have success.
And based on that criteria, are you a successful individual?
I feel I am, but it's been a wild ride, It's been a wild ride. I'm happy with where we're at. Everyone always wants to be a bigger podcaster, wants to have a bigger company. That's always in the back of your head. But you can do what you can do, and hopefully surround yourself with enough people that are that are smarter than you to make things move forward quicker.
Well, if people want to connect with you or perhaps visit your castle, where do they go?
Yeah, if they want to reach out on the podcasting side, it's Todd at blueberry.com. That's blueberry without the E's because we couldn't afford the E's. They were $2 million. So it's blueberry.com. My personal website is geeknewscentral.com. I have a podcast that we do every week called The New Media Show. You can get a PhD in podcasting if you listen to the show long enough. I'm all over social. Just search for my name, Todd Cochrane. You can find with me, connect with wherever you're hanging out currently online. But appreciate you having me on the show.
You've been a great guest. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.